The gun was pointed directly at my 16-year-old son's chest. Marcus stood there trembling, his white cane shaking in his hand, his guide dog pressed against his legs. Sheriff Karen's voice cut through the afternoon air like a blade. I said, "Put your hands where I can see them." My blind son could not even see the weapon aimed at his heart. He could not understand why this woman was screaming at him. And in that moment, watching my child's terror, I knew Sheriff Karen had made the biggest mistake of her life. My name is David Chen, and for 12 years I served as chief prosecutor in Millbrook County. It was a quiet job in a quiet town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and trust ran deep. I prosecuted drunk drivers, domestic disputes, and the occasional theft. Nothing too serious, nothing that kept me awake at night. The most important thing in my world was not my career. It was my son Marcus. He turned 16 that spring, a bright kid with an infectious laugh and more courage than most adults I knew. Marcus had been blind since birth, but he never let that define his limits. He navigated our small town with remarkable independence, using his white cane and his guide dog Cooper to get around. Every morning I watched him walk to school, his backpack slung over his shoulder, Cooper trotting beside him. He knew every crack in the sidewalk, every street corner, every shortcut through town. The local shop owners would wave and call out greetings. Marcus would smile and wave back, even though he could not see their faces. "Dad, I do not need you to drive me everywhere," he would tell me when I offered rides. "I can handle myself." And he could. Marcus played piano at church functions, participated in debate club, and had more friends than I did. He was learning to be independent, and I was learning to let him. It was not easy for a father, especially one who had seen too many cases cross his desk involving people who preyed on the vulnerable. But I trusted our community. I trusted our local police force to keep citizens like Marcus safe. Sheriff Martinez had retired the previous year after 25 years of solid service. His replacement was supposed to continue that tradition of community policing and mutual respect. I had no idea how wrong I was. Our evenings were peaceful. Marcus would practice piano while I reviewed case files at the kitchen table. My wife Sarah would grade papers from her third-grade classroom, and we would talk about ordinary things. Homework assignments, weekend plans, Marcus's progress in his advanced placement classes. "He is growing up so fast," Sarah would say, watching Marcus guide Cooper through their evening routine. "Too fast," I would reply, but I was proud of him. Proud of his independence, his confidence, his determination to live life on his own terms. I believed our small town was a safe place for a young man like Marcus to spread his wings. I believed the badge meant something to the people who wore it. I believed in the system I had served faithfully for over a decade. Those beliefs were about to be shattered. Sheriff Karen Martinez arrived in Millbrook County with impressive credentials and big promises. She had served in 3 different departments across 2 states, each time bringing what she called modern policing techniques to rural communities. During her interview with the county commissioners, she spoke about accountability, community engagement, and zero tolerance for crime. "We are going to clean up this county," she declared at her first town hall meeting. "No more of this small town, look the other way policing. Real criminals are going to face real consequences." The audience applauded. I applauded. It sounded like exactly what our growing community needed as we transitioned from sleepy farm town to suburban bedroom community. But within her first month, something felt wrong. The complaints started trickling into my office. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow, said Deputy Martinez had been unnecessarily aggressive when she called about teenagers in her yard. A local veteran named Tom Willis claimed she had treated him like a criminal during a routine traffic stop, refusing to believe his disability parking permit was legitimate. She kept asking why I needed the handicap spot if I could walk to my car, Tom told me, his voice shaking with frustration. She made me show her my prosthetic leg right there in the Walmart parking lot. I tried to give Karen the benefit of the doubt. New sheriffs often came in with different styles. Maybe she was just trying to establish authority. Maybe these were isolated incidents blown out of proportion by people resistant to change. Then came the report about Jake Morrison. Jake was a 52-year-old man with autism who worked part-time at the grocery store. He lived in a group home and walked the same route to work every day, always carrying his identification card and emergency contact information. Jake had difficulty making eye contact and sometimes repeated phrases when he was nervous. According to witnesses, Sheriff Karen stopped Jake one afternoon because his behavior seemed suspicious. When Jake could not immediately respond to her rapid-fire questions and began rocking back and forth in distress, she handcuffed him and called for backup. She treated him like he was dangerous, Jake's caseworker told me. He was terrified. He kept asking for his staff person, but she would not let anyone approach. Jake spent 2 hours in custody before his group home staff could convince Karen that he posed no threat to anyone. No charges were filed, but Jake stopped walking to work alone. His confidence was shattered. I started paying closer attention to Karen's methods. I requested copies of her incident reports and found troubling patterns. She seemed to target people who could not respond quickly or normally to her commands. The elderly, the disabled, non-English speakers, people with mental health conditions. Her reports were always technically correct. She followed proper procedures, documented everything thoroughly, and never crossed obvious legal lines. But something about her approach felt predatory. "I am probably overreacting," I told Sarah one evening after reviewing another stack of complaints. "Maybe I am just not used to her style." "Trust your instincts," Sarah replied. "You have been doing this job long enough to know the difference between tough policing and picking on vulnerable people." I tried to schedule a meeting with Karen to discuss community concerns, but she was always too busy. Her secretary would take messages, but Karen never called back. When I saw her at county meetings, she was polite but distant. "Everything is under control, Prosecutor Chen," she would say with a tight smile. "I am just doing my job." But I had a growing feeling that her job was not protecting and serving everyone equally. Some citizens seemed to matter more than others in Karen's version of law and order. I had no idea how personal this was about to become. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late April when my world changed forever. Marcus had stayed after school for debate practice and was walking home his usual route. He knew every step of that journey. Cooper led him past the library, through the small downtown area, and onto Maple Street toward our neighborhood. Marcus was 2 blocks from home when Sheriff Karen spotted him. Later, I would piece together what happened from witness statements and security camera footage. But in that moment, I only knew that my phone was ringing with a number I did not recognize. "Is this David Chen?" The voice was shaking. "Your son, there is a police officer. She has a gun." I dropped everything and ran. Marcus told me later what those minutes felt like from his perspective. He had been walking normally, Cooper guiding him around a construction area on the sidewalk. He heard heavy footsteps behind him, getting closer. "Hey, you stop right there." Marcus paused, confused. He was not sure if the voice was directed at him. "Are you deaf?" I said. "Stop." He stopped completely, Cooper sitting beside him as trained. Marcus gripped his white cane tighter. "Turn around and face me." Marcus turned, his unseeing eyes looking in the general direction of the voice. He could not make eye contact because he could never make eye contact with anyone. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" I am walking home from school," Marcus answered, his voice quiet and nervous. "Look at me when I am talking to you." "I cannot," Marcus said. "I am blind." That should have ended it. Any reasonable officer would have seen the white cane, the guide dog, the obvious signs that this was a disabled teenager walking home from school. But Karen was not reasonable. "Put your hands where I can see them." Marcus raised his hands, still holding his cane. Cooper whined softly, sensing his owner's distress. "Drop the weapon." "It is my cane," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I need it to walk." "Drop it now." Marcus let his cane fall to the sidewalk. Without it, he was completely disoriented, unable to navigate or defend himself. He stood there swaying slightly, trying to maintain his balance. That was when Karen drew her gun. Mrs. Patterson, who lived across the street, said later that she could not believe what she was seeing. A police officer pointing a weapon at a blind teenager with a guide dog. She immediately called 911. "There is something wrong here," she told the dispatcher. "This boy is not dangerous. He is just trying to get home." By the time I arrived, a small crowd had gathered. Marcus was still standing in the same spot, hands raised, trembling. Cooper was pressed against his legs, the dog's training overridden by protective instinct. Karen stood 10 feet away, weapon drawn, shouting commands. "I need you to get on the ground." "He cannot see you," Mrs. Patterson called out from her porch. "He is blind." Karen ignored her. "Get down now." I pushed through the crowd and saw my son's terror-stricken face. Marcus had no idea where the ground was, where the threat was coming from, or how to comply with commands that made no sense to someone who could not see. "That is my son," I shouted. "He is blind. Put the gun down." Karen's head snapped toward me, and for the first time she seemed to realize she might have made a mistake. But instead of lowering her weapon, she doubled down. "Stay back." He was acting suspicious, refusing to follow orders. "He is 16 years old and blind." I moved closer to Marcus, my prosecutor instincts warring with my father's panic. "Marcus, it is Dad. I am here." Marcus's shoulders sagged with relief. "Dad, I do not understand what is happening." "I know, son. It is going to be okay." Karen finally holstered her weapon, but her expression remained hard. He was not complying with lawful orders. I helped Marcus retrieve his cane, my hands shaking with rage and relief. Cooper stayed close, still agitated from the encounter. "We need to talk," I told Karen, my voice deadly calm. "He should have identified himself as disabled," she replied, as if that justified pulling a gun on a child. I looked at my son's white cane, his guide dog, his obvious blindness, and realized that Sheriff Karen was either incompetent or something much worse. Either way, she had just threatened my child's life. And I was going to make sure she faced consequences. That evening, Karen filed her incident report. I requested a copy the next morning and could not believe what I was reading. According to her version, Marcus had been acting erratically in a residential area and failed to comply with lawful orders from a peace officer. She wrote that Marcus had been carrying a potential weapon and refused to make eye contact or respond appropriately to verbal commands. She mentioned his blindness only in passing, as if it were a minor detail rather than the central fact that explained everything about his behavior. Subject claimed to be visually impaired, her report stated, but officer observed suspicious movement patterns inconsistent with total blindness. It was a masterclass in bureaucratic fiction, technically accurate in some details, but completely misleading about the actual events. Anyone reading that report without context would assume Marcus had been acting like a threat. I called Sheriff Karen's office to discuss the incident. Sheriff Martinez is unavailable, her secretary told me. She is investigating several active cases. I left 3 messages. None were returned. 2 days later, I learned that Karen had visited Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who had called 911. Mrs. Patterson called me, clearly shaken. She wanted to know exactly what I saw, Mrs. Patterson said. She kept asking if I was sure about the details. She said witnesses sometimes remember things wrong, especially in stressful situations. Did she threaten you? Not directly, but she made it clear that filing a false report with police is a serious crime. She wanted me to know that. I felt a chill run down my spine. Karen was not just covering up her mistake, she was actively intimidating witnesses. I started making phone calls to other people who had been present during the incident. 3 of them told me similar stories. Karen or one of her deputies had visited them, asking probing questions about their recollection of events, and subtly suggesting that their memories might be unreliable. The security camera footage from the nearby bank should have provided definitive proof of what happened. But when I requested it through official channels, I was told the camera had been malfunctioning that day and no usable footage was available. That was when I realized this was not about one bad decision by an overzealous officer. This was a systematic cover-up by someone who understood how to manipulate the system. I began digging deeper into Karen's background. Her personnel files from previous departments were mostly sealed, but I had contacts in law enforcement across the state. What I learned made my blood run cold. Karen had a pattern. In her previous position in Riverside County, there had been 3 excessive force complaints involving disabled individuals. All 3 cases had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence or conflicting witness statements. In her job before that, she had been investigated for falsifying reports in cases involving elderly victims. The investigation had been closed when key witnesses became uncooperative. Karen was not incompetent. She was predatory. She targeted people who could not fight back effectively, who would struggle to articulate what happened to them, who could be dismissed as unreliable witnesses. People like my son. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Marcus sleeping upstairs and made a decision. The official complaint process would go nowhere. Karen had too much practice covering her tracks, too many allies in the department, too much experience manipulating the system. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had threatened the son of the chief prosecutor of Millbrook County. She had picked on the wrong family. And unlike her previous victims, I had the legal knowledge, professional connections, and resources to fight back. I opened my laptop and began making a list. Every complaint against Karen that had crossed my desk, every witness who had been intimidated, every piece of evidence that had mysteriously disappeared. If Karen wanted to play games with the justice system, I would show her how that game was really played. But I would play by the rules. I would build a case so airtight that not even her corruption could escape it. Marcus deserved justice. Every person Karen had targeted deserved justice. And I was going to make sure they got it. I started with the victims Karen thought would never fight back. Jake Morrison, the man with autism who had been handcuffed for suspicious behavior. Tom Willis, the veteran she had humiliated in the parking lot. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who had been afraid to call police again after Karen's aggressive response. Each conversation was heartbreaking. These were good people who had been traumatized by someone sworn to protect them, but they were also afraid to speak up. "Who is going to believe me over a sheriff?" Jake's caseworker asked. Jake cannot testify clearly. His disability makes him an unreliable witness in most people's eyes. That was exactly what Karen was counting on. I began working evenings and weekends, using my personal time to investigate. I could not use official resources without tipping off Karen or her allies in the department. This had to be done carefully, quietly, and thoroughly. I reached out to contacts in surrounding counties and found the pattern repeated everywhere Karen had worked. Complaints against vulnerable people that resulted in no consequences. Witnesses who suddenly became uncooperative. Evidence that mysteriously disappeared. But I also found something Karen did not expect me to find. Other prosecutors who had noticed the same patterns. District Attorney Rebecca Torres in Riverside County had been suspicious of several cases involving Karen, but had never had enough evidence to pursue charges. When I called her, she was immediately interested. "I always felt something was wrong," she told me. "But these cases are hard to prosecute. The victims often have credibility issues through no fault of their own. Juries struggle with witnesses who cannot make eye contact or who have trouble communicating clearly." "What if we could show a pattern?" I asked. "Multiple jurisdictions, dozens of victims, all fitting the same profile." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. That would change everything. I began building a database. Every complaint, every incident report, every witness statement I could find. I documented dates, locations, victim demographics, and outcomes. The pattern was undeniable once you saw it laid out systematically. Karen had been targeting disabled individuals for at least 5 years across 3 counties. She would escalate minor encounters into major incidents, then write reports that made her victims look dangerous or non-compliant. When complaints were filed, witnesses would be intimidated and evidence would disappear. But she had gotten sloppy in Millbrook County. Maybe she thought a small town would be easier to control. Maybe she underestimated the intelligence and determination of her victims' families. Or maybe she just never expected to threaten the child of someone who knew how to build federal cases. I contacted the FBI's Civil Rights Division. Agent Sarah Kim listened to my presentation with growing interest. "This could be prosecuted as a pattern of civil rights violations," she said. "But we would need multiple victims willing to testify and solid documentation of the systematic nature of her actions." "I can provide both," I told her. Working with Agent Kim, I began approaching Karen's victims with a different message. "You are not alone. This was not your fault. And together, we can make sure this never happens to anyone else." One by one, they agreed to cooperate. Jake Morrison's caseworker helped him practice his testimony. Tom Willis provided medical documentation of his service-connected disability. Mrs. Henderson shared recordings she had made of her interactions with Karen's deputies. But the strongest witness was my own son. Marcus had been working with a counselor to process his trauma from the gun incident. With her help, he was able to articulate clearly what he had experienced and how it had affected him. "I want to help," he told me one evening. "If my testimony can prevent this from happening to other people, then what happened to me will have meant something." I was proud of him and heartbroken at the same time. No 16-year-old should have to carry that burden. But as I looked at the case file growing on my desk, I knew we were building something powerful. Karen had spent years preying on people she thought were powerless. She was about to learn what happened when the powerless found someone willing to fight for them. The trap was almost ready. The coordination took months to perfect. FBI agent Kim worked with prosecutors in 3 counties to synchronize our case. We needed to move simultaneously to prevent Karen from destroying evidence or intimidating witnesses. The breakthrough came when we discovered Karen's financial records. She had been receiving payments from a private security company that contracted with local businesses. Nothing illegal about that, except she was using her position as sheriff to pressure business owners into hiring that specific company. Store owners who refused to hire Karen's preferred security firm found themselves subjected to frequent compliance checks and surprise inspections. Their customers were hassled in parking lots. Their businesses were targeted for minor violations that other establishments ignored. It was a protection racket disguised as law enforcement. "This gives us the corruption angle," Agent Kim explained. "Civil rights violations are serious, but financial crimes make juries angry. They understand extortion." We had Karen on multiple federal charges: civil rights violations for her systematic targeting of disabled individuals, extortion for her security company scheme, obstruction of justice for intimidating witnesses and destroying evidence. But we needed her to make one more mistake. The opportunity came when Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired college professor with early-stage dementia, called 911 about a suspicious person in her yard. It was actually her neighbor doing yard work, but Dr. Williams was confused and frightened. Karen responded to the call personally. Based on her pattern, we expected her to treat Dr. Williams dismissively or aggressively. Instead, she exceeded our worst expectations. Dr. Williams had difficulty remembering details and sometimes repeated herself. When she could not provide a clear description of the intruder, Karen became impatient and hostile. "Are you taking drugs, ma'am? You seem confused." "I have dementia," Dr. Williams replied quietly. "That is convenient," Karen said. "Maybe you should not be living alone if you cannot tell the difference between a burglar and a gardener." What Karen did not know was that Dr. Williams' daughter had installed security cameras after her mother's diagnosis. The entire encounter was recorded in high definition. Karen threatened to have Dr. Williams committed for a psychiatric evaluation if she made any more false reports. She suggested that someone with dementia could not be trusted to live independently and might need to be placed somewhere safe. It was exactly the kind of abuse of power we had been documenting, but this time we had video evidence that could not be dismissed or mysteriously disappear. Agent Kim obtained the warrant. Federal marshals, state investigators, and county prosecutors moved simultaneously at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I was not part of the arrest team, but I watched from across the street as Karen was led out of her house in handcuffs. The look of shocked disbelief on her face was something I will never forget. She had spent so long targeting people she thought were powerless that she never considered someone might fight back effectively. The local news crews arrived within minutes. Karen's perp walk was broadcast across 3 counties by noon. Sheriff Karen Martinez has been arrested on federal charges including civil rights violations, extortion, and obstruction of justice, the reporter announced. The charges stem from a multi-county investigation into alleged systematic abuse of disabled and elderly citizens. My phone started ringing immediately. Other victims who had been afraid to come forward were suddenly ready to tell their stories. The floodgates opened. But the call that mattered most came from Marcus. "Dad, I saw the news. Is it over?" "The arrest is just the beginning," I told him. "But yes, son, she cannot hurt anyone anymore." Karen's bail was set at $500,000. The charges carried a potential sentence of 20 years in federal prison. Her security company scheme alone involved hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal payments. More importantly, every case she had touched was now under review. Convictions based on her testimony were being reconsidered. Evidence she had collected was being re-examined. The corruption was deeper than any of us had imagined. But as I watched the news coverage that evening, I felt something I had not experienced in months. Hope. Justice was not always swift, but sometimes it was thorough. Karen Martinez was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Karen's trial began 6 months later in federal court. The courthouse was packed every day with victims, family members, and community advocates who wanted to see justice served. I sat in the gallery as a witness and victim's father, not as a prosecutor. It was strange being on the other side of a courtroom after so many years, but I wanted to see this through to the end. The prosecution team, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Rodriguez, methodically presented the case we had built together. Witness after witness took the stand to describe their encounters with Karen Martinez. Jake Morrison testified about being handcuffed and detained for suspicious behavior while walking to work with his disability identification card clearly visible. His case worker had helped him practice, and his testimony was clear and powerful. "She made me feel like a criminal," Jake said simply. "I was just trying to go to work." Tom Willis described being forced to show his prosthetic leg in a public parking lot because Karen refused to believe his disability was legitimate. The jury visibly flinched when he detailed the humiliation. Mrs. Henderson, now 83 years old, testified about Karen's intimidating visit after she had called 911 for help. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "I have never been afraid of police before," she said. "But after that day, I was afraid to call for help when I needed it." Dr. Williams' daughter played the security camera footage of Karen threatening to have her mother committed. The jury watched in horrified silence as Karen berated a confused elderly woman for having dementia. But the testimony that broke my heart was my own son's. Marcus took the witness stand with Cooper beside him. He described walking home from school on a familiar route, following the same path he had taken hundreds of times before. "I heard someone yelling, but I was not sure they were talking to me," Marcus testified. "When I realized they were, I tried to do what they asked, but I could not see what they wanted me to do." He explained how Karen had commanded him to make eye contact, drop his weapon, and get on the ground without explaining where the ground was or how to safely navigate to it. "I was scared," Marcus said quietly. "I did not understand why she was angry at me. I was just trying to get home." The defense attorney tried to suggest that Marcus could have identified himself as blind more clearly, but Marcus had a simple response. "I was carrying a white cane and had a guide dog," he said. "I thought that would be obvious." The jury saw through Karen's defense strategy immediately. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was just doing her job, following proper procedures, responding to genuinely suspicious behavior. But the pattern was too clear. Dozens of victims, all disabled or elderly, all treated with the same unnecessary aggression and contempt. Karen's financial records told the second part of the story. The security company payments, the businesses pressured into contracts, the protection racket disguised as law enforcement. This defendant used her badge as a weapon, Prosecutor Rodriguez told the jury in closing arguments. She targeted the most vulnerable members of our community, people who could not fight back, people who would struggle to be believed. She thought no one would stop her. She thought no one would speak up for her victims. She was wrong. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Karen's face went white as the verdict was read. Civil rights violations, extortion, obstruction of justice. Each count carried significant prison time. At sentencing 2 months later, the judge allowed victim impact statements. One by one, Karen's victims stood up and told her how her actions had affected their lives. Marcus chose to speak last. "You pulled a gun on me because I could not see you," he said, looking in Karen's general direction. "You made me afraid to walk alone in my own neighborhood, but you also taught me something important." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You taught me that when someone abuses their power, good people will stand up and fight back. My father fought for me, but he also fought for everyone you hurt. That gives me hope." Judge Patricia Chen sentenced Karen Martinez to 18 years in federal prison. "You betrayed the public trust," the judge said. "You turned a badge of honor into an instrument of oppression. The sentence reflects not just your crimes, but the systematic nature of your abuse." As Karen was led away in shackles, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that she could never hurt anyone again. Satisfaction that justice had been served, but also sadness for all the people she had traumatized over the years. The case made national news. "Small-town sheriff gets 18 years for targeting disabled," read one headline. But for me, it was never about headlines or publicity. It was about a blind teenager who deserved to walk home from school without fear. The months following Karen's conviction brought changes I never expected. Marcus slowly regained his confidence with the help of his counselor and the support of our community. The first time he walked to school alone after the trial, I watched from our front porch with my heart in my throat. But he made it there and back without incident, Cooper trotting proudly beside him. "I was nervous," he told me that evening. "But I realized I was not afraid of walking alone anymore. I was just afraid of letting fear control my life." The new sheriff, elected after Karen's arrest, implemented sweeping reforms. New training on disability awareness, body cameras for all officers, a civilian oversight committee with representatives from disability advocacy groups. Sheriff Patricia Gonzalez personally visited every one of Karen's victims to apologize on behalf of the department. "This should never have happened," she told Marcus during her visit to our home. "We are committed to making sure it never happens again." Other changes rippled through the community. The county commissioners passed new policies requiring cultural competency training for all public employees. Local businesses displayed disability awareness signs. Schools incorporated disability education into their curricula. But the most meaningful change was personal. Marcus started volunteering with a disability rights organization, sharing his story with other young people who had faced discrimination. His testimony helped pass state legislation requiring specific training for law enforcement officers on interacting with disabled citizens. "Something good came from something terrible," he told a group of advocates at the state capitol. "That does not make what happened okay, but it makes it meaningful." Dr. Williams' family used the settlement from their civil lawsuit to establish a foundation supporting elderly people with dementia. Tom Willis became an advocate for veterans' rights. Jake Morrison was promoted to assistant manager at the grocery store and trained new employees on disability inclusion. Karen's victims found their voices and used them to help others. The FBI investigation expanded to other counties where Karen had worked. Additional charges were filed. More victims came forward. The culture of targeting vulnerable people that Karen had represented was being systematically dismantled. I received calls from prosecutors across the country asking for advice on similar cases. The legal precedents we had established were being used to protect disabled individuals in other communities. "You started something bigger than just one case," Agent Kim told me when the investigation finally concluded. "This is going to help people for years to come." But the moment that mattered most to me happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after the trial. I was working in my office when I heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. Marcus appeared in my doorway with Cooper, both of them slightly out of breath. "I walked here from school," he announced with a grin. "Just wanted to say hi." He had walked across town by himself, navigating busy streets and unfamiliar intersections, to visit me at work. It was something he had never done before Karen's attack, and something I thought he might never do again. "I am proud of you," I told him. "I am proud of us," he replied. "We did not let her win." As I watched my son and his guide dog head back into the afternoon sunshine, I reflected on what we had learned. Evil often targets those it perceives as powerless, but power is not always what it appears to be. Sometimes power is a blind teenager who refuses to stay afraid. Sometimes power is a community that stands up for its most vulnerable members. And sometimes power is the simple truth that justice, though delayed, will not be denied. Karen Martinez thought she could abuse her authority without consequences because she chose victims who could not fight back. She learned too late that she was wrong.